Great. All right, we're ready. All right, this is Dr. Michael Alvidrez, better known by his students as Dr. A. He comes to us from Denver, Colorado. He served in the classroom for 16 years. He's also worked in a prison for 2 years. I'll let him tell you about that sometime. He has some interesting stories. He truly loves teaching. He's very passionate, very enthusiastic. On any given day, you can see him diligently working in his office, preparing for class, and his enthusiasm is contagious. So we're very excited to have him here, and I think everyone would agree that he's a great addition to our team. So without further ado, Dr. A.
All right. Yes, I was in prison for 2 years, but that's a whole other story. We could talk diversity about that for days. And I taught elementary school. So mine, I wish I could talk about diversity. I'll probably have a lot, we'll have a little bit, but Dr. Turner was emailing us and he was asking, what is your #1 home run hitting classroom engagement technique? And I emailed him back and said, Dr. Turner, I don't have a home run. When you teach elementary school, what worked 1 hour ago might not work 15 minutes after that. And so he's like, well, you need to come up with one. And so I was like, okay, what do I like to do at the college level as well? Because I still do some of the things I did at the elementary school level. I was singing with my class yesterday. They found out I do not rap very well, but I do like it, and they don't like my old stuff. But we do some different things. I teach currently the assessment class and the diversity class for elementary school teachers. And so really one thing I found that works best, or my quasi home run that works most of the time, it's not a home run, is engaging my students with current events. Because I think sometimes, as Dr. Rubin pointed out, textbooks are a wee bit on the whitewash side. And whether you're teaching diversity or whether you're teaching assessment, it's just on the boring side sometimes with some of those textbooks. I try to bring things into the classroom that are going to get my students talking and engaging because I don't like them just sitting there like little people and doing nothing, sitting in rows and not talking. And so we have lively discussions. And so this is just really going to be a quick, don't worry, I'll make up the time, Dr. Rubin. We're good. So I'm not definitely going through all these. There's tons of ways to involve students. We're not going through any of these. But as a elementary school teacher, taught elementary school or been in any middle school, or you probably start noticing some of these, and we use them all the time. I was out Wednesday in Whitesboro, Alabama. As you can tell from my accent, I am not from the South, but I do get to claim to be a Southerner because I was born in Texas. About as far west Texas as you can get, though. I am from the part of Texas that Texas doesn't claim, and that would be El Paso, Texas. I am a Hispanic teacher. None of them know that. Until we were talking diversity, they're like, I'll bring it up. They're like, what? And then conversations really change really quick. It's quite interesting to hear what they think of first. They don't realize. And then some are challenged a wee bit, but I think it's interesting to get them going. But so what I think about is when students are engaged in my class, assessment, when you're teaching it to 35 interns, they're in their student teaching, at 4:30 at night on Monday can be difficult, to say the least. Most of them do not want to be there. And so that's why we actually changed my class next semester. But so they all must be participants. Most of my students would rather sit at their little device, look at their phone, and they know I walk around all the time. And I've caught a couple, and I'll just start reading, and I'll say they don't know I'm looking over their shoulder, and I respond back to them what they should text, and the whole class looks real quick. I'm just trying to tell them, we're all there to do it. So they all must be participants. But they also need to feel that they're in a safe environment to bring up some issues that they might have. If a student doesn't feel safe to speak in that class, whether it's going to be retribution from the other students or from the teacher, they're going to be less likely to actually say what they think, say what they feel. I think a lot of those great quotes that Dr. Rubin had were great. People actually thinking. And that's really what I want my students to be. I want them to take some ownership of their learning. I am not the stand in front of the pulpit, purveyor of all information, you have it type person. Usually right now I'd be walking around and these chairs are hindering me and there's not a lot of room. So this is what I like for my class. I want them to be engaged. I want them to be working. I want them to be talking. Every report card I have from kindergarten through 12th grade says, number one, does what he was doing. We don't worry about the grade part. Number one mistake, talks too much. High school, checked off, talks too much. And so we talk a lot in my class because I think speaking and talking is an important thing. And if they're going to be classroom teachers, they're going to have to do it for 8 hours a day. You know, and so we talk about even teacher voice because I have some. What are you guys saying? And be ready to say there and explain their thinking. So for what I do is that current events can be used in all types of classrooms, I'm finding. You know, all different reading, writing, speaking, game. I mean, you can think of current events going down the list. And there's all kinds. And with the presidential election, it seems like it's only doubled with stuff that I can use in my classes and finding different things that my students are engaged with. And so I brought a couple examples that I've recently used in my class, and I have a couple also to show. But when we incorporate is a few different things. You can do it at the beginning of the class. I've had it where I've had articles, kids grabbed an article, or I emailed it to them and said, read this before you come to class and be ready to talk about it. They can journal really quick, write on it, what do they think? During my lessons, you know, we're talking about something. We're having a great discussion about, I don't know, the Aspire test. You know, I actually hand them out then an article. They work with their groups. I do lots of group work. I'm not big on individuality necessarily. We're working together as a class. They work and think. So during the lesson, we're working on this. We do it independent time just on their own. Could be a Blackboard thing. It might be something in class or at home. I send all kinds of things. They probably think I steal newspapers from different places, which I do take a lot of newspapers. And I try to get things involved with them. And there's lots of places to get resources, and we'll talk about those. So here was one of my assessment examples. You know, I teach assessment. These are on most of my class. I'd say 95% of them are doing their internship right now. They're student teaching. They're going to be graduating this in April. And one of this, it was state to use the White Plains scores as the model for all area schools. One thing I found, I try to go wide and narrow with my students. So wide, I might just bring up test results. We've looked at different research for the entire country versus the world and, you know, looking at different things like that. But many times I find they get more engaged when it's actually right around here. Where is this taking place? And so for me, this is all new because I'm not from here. I don't know any of these things. Alabama was great to talk about White Plains because one of my students said, oh, I go to White Plains. And describes how at White Plains, they actually, every kid has a card, note card. Every kid, and they are placed in this office room, or the special room is what, and they're literally placed wherever they're at. And so it brought up all kinds of great conversation because this intern's like, oh, I've seen that room with my teacher. I was just there. And so she was able to give us quite a bit of different information than just came from the article. But just giving them an article to talk about, I think we spent 20 minutes just talking about an article and what do these test scores really mean? Do we look at other schools? How do you compare a White Plains versus Anniston versus Etowah County versus, I mean, lots of different things that can bring up. And so we spent a lot of time talking about this. What does this really mean? And as a teacher for assessment, what are these, you know, the Aspires, you know, what they talk about the most. But what does this mean for each of us in our classroom? So this is one quick example that I used for assessment. Diversity was an interesting one. You know, I do teach the diversity class and for elementary school teachers. And so I found this one a couple of weeks ago, and it was just talking about that I didn't realize the busing, you know, people being able to optionally enroll or open enroll at Kittystone Elementary or Jacksonville City Schools versus other schools that you don't have to do that. And so, you know, a lot of my students didn't even realize about the whole busing laws that are still in place for Oxford City and for Anniston, and it's actually a 2-page article, and I only put the first one on here. But a lot of my students didn't even understand what busing was. They had not a clue that these laws were in place. What are they? What are they for? And so, you know, all this difference on students' policy transferring was quite different. But then I also gave a different article from Colorado where Colorado was a completely school choice state. Doesn't matter where you live. If your parents can get you to any school they want, they can take you to any public school. There is no, it's a school choice state. And so we had a great lively discussion on, is that fair, not fair, and all kinds of different things to bring out. But a lot of them didn't even understand what some of the history behind, you know, this area and these schools. And then, so they're like, well, do other counties have these? I'm like, I don't know. So that brought up more discussion. So we were researching in class, hey, I wonder if Etowah County has a busing rule. And so they were looking at all these different things because when you're class, I truly want my kids engaged. I want them talking about different things that are reliable, not just a textbook that can get okay, but let's bring it down to a little level. Let's bring it down to where are we at now? What's it going to be in our classrooms? Because the classrooms vary. You could be one school. I've noticed going in my travels, last semester they had me going from, well, I say Guntersville, but nobody says the T here. Guntersville. I'm learning. Going to Guntersville. I went from Guntersville to Munford. And 11 schools in between. I think Dr. Bavnese had me she's like, I want you to see Alabama. I got to see Alabama. But let me tell you, they are completely different around here. You go from one, it's like night and day going to different places. And so, I think a lot of our students have this mentality that I'm going to graduate, I'm going back to my hometown to teach. And I tell them, you're going to go to the first school that offers you a job to teach. Because if you want to have that mentality, you might not be getting a job for a long time. And so we talk about what's going to happen if you are, I bring out a lot of things. ESL is a big passion of mine. I started my master's in ESL. It's a big thing. And so I'm big on English as a second language, bilingual education. They're like, we don't have any of those students here. So they're called those students is what they're telling me. So we have all kinds of great conversations. But I'm like, have any of you heard of Albertville? Oh, yeah, that's right up the road. Well, their ESL population is exploding by the hundreds of percent. Not like 1 or 2 new kids, but by the hundreds of percent. So, and so it's just bringing up conversations with these kids that they maybe wouldn't have thought to use before. And I just get them out of the newspaper. I get them off the internet. But I try to, we go global and we take it down, country. And then, of course, I think it's just as important to let them know what's around here. Most of our students, when I talk with them, I would say 90% want to stay within their little Alabama, I would say within 20 miles of where they're at now. Most of them do not want to leave. It's very rare, one's like, I want to leave this place. I'm like, oh, great, where do you want to go? Georgia. I'm like, that's like right there. I'm like, I thought they were going to say like New York or go somewhere different. Georgia. So they're going to Georgia. And so it's like going a long way, but okay. But I think trying to see the difference out there, because schools are quite different in all of these places. I bet if they were going to go to some places in Georgia, it could look quite different from where they're at now. So I brought in, this is just one quick example. This was probably one of the favorite ones I brought in my diversity class, and I bring this one in not till later on in the semester, but it's how were your school's ACT Aspire results? And elementary teachers, they are really concerned about these because your legislature does a nice job of bringing up Aspire test results and teacher wages and all these things that I brought up as well. They wanted to look at school results the entire class if I let them, so I ended up just sending them the link, and they all went home, and I got more emails. Did you know this was this, and I'm at this, and I'm like, okay, that's just for, but little things. So websites can be used as a current event. They end up talking a long time about some of these, and so sometimes you have to guide them where they want to go, or I sometimes let the current event drive the entire instruction. What I have planned might just go by the wayside. If they are actively engaged and they are learning and they're researching and they're discussing, hey, whatever I had planned that night, we got another night. We can make it move. So, being flexible with your students, using all types of research out there. There's tons of current events. There's always something you can find. I've yet to find a subject, I was thinking about today, what I could do. I read yesterday, Alabama faces teacher shortage. I don't know how true that is or not. Sometimes when they write these, you start wondering, because then you start looking at where's the mass media coming from. And then I was thinking, well, I know there's communication people in our college, and I found today in the newspaper, Alabama police plead for citizens to call 911 instead of sending Facebook messages. Who would have thought? People are sending Facebook messages to help. I see a crime, let me Facebook the cops instead of just call 911. Can you imagine the communication? If you're in a communication class talking about social media, you could have all kinds, and I just get the stuff from local places. So using current events really helps to engage all of our students. And I found there are some who, you have to kind of push a little bit to help them want to think outside the box, to want them to be critical thinkers. I'm always urging them, why do you say that? I just don't want to say, oh, I like this, or I agree everybody should have equal. Well, why do you think that? Well, but they hate me when I say the word why. They almost look at me, he's going to ask me why. Because I want them to really think. It's a lot more than just their reason, but why do you think that? They love me on assessments because I give lots of short, little essays. Don't just tell me what year it happened, but why is that important to you that happened? How does it affect our students in the classroom? How is it going to affect you as a teacher in that classroom? Where we can find them, lots of places. Newspapers, Anniston Star. Actually, I get lots of things from the Anniston Star. Great paper. I find things off of al.com. Not sure, I'm sure it's associated probably with a paper, but that's where I got the Facebook one today. Online newspapers, it's great for elementary schools. I did this with my 5th graders. I use current events all the time. This time last year, I was getting ready for our state test, in fact. But the New York Times actually has a wonderful section for elementary school, middle school, and high school teachers, totally built around using current events in your class. All kinds of different discussions. Wall Street Journal, a lot of the big ones. YouTube, I use all the time for different clips, different things. We were having a great discussion in our diversity class about the professor in Missouri who was getting all mad. And I mean, lots of things can come up, and it seems like everybody puts it out there on YouTube. And then another great one I use, and I share this with all my students because I tell them, try this in your class. We're always wanting to push our students to read and be critical thinkers. Newsella is a wonderful site for students, and I love it that it actually has articles in Spanish as well. So it's not just articles, and there's all kinds. They're ranging from opinion to, lots of different places. But I like it tries to bring in some other things as well. The Spanish ones are great. And that's just from some of the diversity I've worked with. And so these are just a few of the places you can find them. But I think, I was thinking even, okay, what else could we do? Imagine doing a whole thing on, instead of current events, but you take, if you're doing a communications course or something, political cartoons. You could have those in a communications class that would last for days, looking at different things on political cartoons. And so my thing is, how can we bring what's happening current into our classrooms with our students that's also happening in the schools? We talk about ESL in Albertville increasing hundreds of % a year. What does that really mean to you as a teacher? How's that going to affect you as a teacher with students? What are you going to do? During a question I gave on a midterm last semester is, you go as a brand new teacher and you have a new student come in that doesn't speak a word of English. What are you going to do? They put back, I hope that doesn't happen in my class. They didn't really get a nice response from me, but because they're like, I don't know what I would do. Well, and so we need to help push some of our students out of their little comfort box that they might think, I grew up I was in Whitesboro, so I use Whitesboro. I was up there on Wednesday. I'm in Whitesboro. I only know about Whitesboro, Alabama. I'm not worried about this whole world around me. And I think sometimes we get in this little, snow globe of area, and this is the only area I'm going to be in, and we turn it upside down. It's all rosy, and we get our little snow that way. But it's really not. What is the world around us, and how does this play with our students? Because our students are able to get so much more information with these Facebook feeds, with the internet. I mean, they are picking up on things, and what are they thinking about it? And so these are just a few of the things that I use to try to engage my kids, or I still call them kids. I'm still an elementary school teacher, I think, always, in the class. What am I going to do to engage them so that they're learners, so that they're thinkers, that they think critically? And it's not just, I want to say what makes him happy or her happy, but what do I think? Why do I think that? What is my place in this society? How am I going to help each other? Even with a topic such as assessment, which, I tell my students, I give them this all the time, assessment is not the cool shiny part of an outside car. It's not the super cool stereo. Assessment's really the engine that's helping to drive our instruction. It's not the cool fancy stuff, so how do we make it interesting? One way that I've been able to do it with my students is by using current events. That is it. I can make sure. Dr. Babney's taught me well, keeping my thing. Any questions? Yeah.
What happens if I'm in school and I can handle 2,000 kids? I've got 2,000 kids and I've got another 1,000 want to get in.
You get to choose.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. So I've got my school full already. I've got another 1,000 kids. What happens then?
They either have to go on a waiting list, but then we talk about what does that create? Because I'll be honest, I taught in an area that was a fairly white middle class area, affluent, and you totally create these little micro schools of, and our students know this, that's the quote unquote athletic school, and so you would tell all the kids who are great athletes went to this school. All the kids who wanted this went to this, and it almost created, and that creates its own discussion in itself. And so you totally get, the kid who, my parents go to work and I have to ride a bus to school is going to go to my neighborhood school because that's where I'm going. So it creates its own, but that's Colorado, and they do their ways of doing lots of different. They're interesting.
go to the K.
I'll check that one.
I'll just tell you. You know, students walk in the front door, the pillars are into the cement.
That's a great little
So
school.
there's a ton. See it.
I have to go check it out. I'm sure Dr. Bavney will put me everywhere. I'm sure. Any other questions? Yes?
On issues that affect them that they are interested in to discuss in the class other than what you bring in, quote unquote.
Right. You know, they actually have. Because, well, what happens a lot of times is a current event will drive something that's happening in their classroom, in their practicum or internship. And this, well, in our class, and that's where the student who brought up, I've actually been in that room in White Plains and seen it. And then we talked about, okay, what does that look like? What is it? What are the implications of that? You know, I think sometimes it can drive them to start thinking about themselves and where they're at. What can I bring in as well? And some do. You know, then I have some who don't, but we're working on those. But it's a good, I think anytime you can get our students critically thinking, the better. You know, I think it's not just to sit and get. I tell them all the time, you're not coming to my class to sit and get. You're coming here to learn and to learn to think critically. All right.